Alright, just a quick video here. Picked up some Japanese Nintendo games, and I got these off eBay, but it was like a local seller. Not a local seller, but like he wasn't far from me, so the shipping was only like $6 or $8, I think, for all this. And the price on these was pretty good, and they're all in pretty good shape. This one's like the worst out of all of them, and it's the oldest out of all of them, so I guess that makes sense. But yeah, I guess we'll start with that. That is Popeye for the Famicom. This was like $6 or $7, which is way cheaper than for me in Canada to try and find the NES version. But for the Famicom, yeah, a dime a dozen. The guy actually had several copies, and they ranged in price depending on the condition they were in. This one, there's like a small scuff there, so I'm guessing that's why it was. I think he had one that was $10 that was in better shape, and he had one that was in worse shape that was like $5 or $6. This one was like $6 or $7, but yeah, condition's okay. Honestly, I'm fine with that. A little bit kind of turning brown or dirty on the back label, but it's all there, so yeah, I'm fine with that. That's Popeye for the Famicom. What next? This is Tetris. Literally, it's just Tetris. This is the Japanese version of Tetris. I've already got literally a couple of the Game Boy Tetris cartridges. So why get this one? Well, honestly, it's it was just because the cover art's cool, the label's cool. It's very unique, and again, it's just like $6. And again, he had like a whole bunch of these, kind of ranging in quality, going up to like, again, I think about $10. This one's like slightly yellowing, the plastic, but like it's not the worst. Actually, overall, it's in okay condition. I mean, the label's fine, so I'm fine with that. And again, this one was kind of like, I think, one of the mid-priced ones. So yeah, and again, just looks cool. We'll go with the Super Famicom next. This is Super Donkey Kong 2. Donkey Kong Country in Japan was called Super Donkey Kong. Again, a game that, because for the most part, I don't think the language difference is going to really affect being able to play the game. And this was like $15, I think. And again, for me to find a copy of Donkey Kong Country 2 here locally in Canada, it probably cost me $40, I'm guessing, for a loose cartridge that's in, decent condition. And again, this one's in pretty good shape. No complaints. That was fairly clean inside. I did open up all of these just to check them. Yeah, this one was fairly clean inside. The dirtiest one was Popeye. Like, it was actually legit dirty. Like, it probably wouldn't have worked if I had just thrown it in a Famicom. But all the rest were actually pretty clean. This was fairly clean. And then this is Donkey Kong. Well, I'm not sure what it says underneath there, but it just says like Donkey Kong Land. And then I'm not sure what that says, but this is actually like our Donkey Kong Land 2. As you can see, it's Diddy and Trixie. Yeah, Donkey Kong Land, it would have been Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong, right? So, like, this is actually Donkey Kong Land 2. And, yeah, again, this was like $10, I think. And it's in okay condition. Is there something? I don't know. That might actually be that might just be part of the artwork. Yeah, it's just part of the artwork. Actually, the label's in really good shape. Again, open this one up. It was super clean. Very, very clean contacts inside of this one. Should the battery be changed? Probably. I gave the game a quick test. These all work, but like the batteries on some of these are probably at the point where they should be changed, especially this one. This is probably the oldest one here with the battery in it, I'm guessing. I'll save this one for last, because this one you've already seen. This is Donkey Kong Country for the Game Boy Color. And I showed this one off because it was really impressive. Like, I was really impressed with how good this one looks, especially on my modded Game Boy Color. It's very strange to me when I played this one in emulation versus like on my IPS modded Game Boy Color. You know, obviously I was expecting like the difference in a DPI or perceived sharpness of the smaller screen, but like all that aside, the contrast, the black levels, the gamma, the saturation was completely different. I'm not sure if, because when I showed this on my actual system, I was showing the Japanese version here, and when I went over to emulation, I was showing the North American version. Is there a difference in like the gamma or the saturation or the black levels between those two? I doubt it. But yet it's like, it's such a night and day difference. Like, this looks so good when you see it on my IPS Game Boy Color. And then when you see it on an emulator, it's just totally washed out. Which is really strange, because like the color and the contrast between the emulator and the IPS screen shouldn't really be that different. So, yeah, I don't know what was going on there, but this looks outstanding on the real Game Boy Color with the IPS screen. And then, so last but not least, this is Donkey Kong Land 3. Now, the interesting thing about this, Donkey Kong Land 3 in North America, the release that we got, was on a Game Boy cartridge. It looked just like Donkey Kong Land and Donkey Kong Land 2. It was a yellow Game Boy cartridge with the notch cut out. It would work in a Game Boy. It was a Game Boy game, not a Game Boy Color game. When they released Donkey Kong Land 3 in Japan, it was a 4 Game Boy Color only. Not even just like having the Game Boy Color enhancements. They went all the way on the 4 Game Boy Color only. To be honest, this doesn't look amazing. Like, it's nowhere near as impressive as Donkey Kong Country on the Game Boy Color. In fact, it barely looks like it's pushing the Game Boy Color to the point I'm surprised it's the 4 Game Boy Color only. Like, it looks good, but it doesn't look like it's going beyond that. Like, I think there's a different color, like on-screen color limitations based on if you do a game that works in the Game Boy and in the Game Boy Color. The ones that are usually on like a black or a dark gray cartridge. One that comes to mind that I own is Shadowgate Classic. That one on the Game Boy, you know, works on a Game Boy, but also works on a Game Boy Color. And you get a fair color palette, but not something like this. And yeah, so I mean, I've shown some side-by-sides here just so you can see. Again, it does look better, but it doesn't look like it's pushing the Game Boy Color like to the limits. It doesn't look like it needed to be a 4 Game Boy Color, especially if it did come out in 1997. What do we have on here? Yeah, copyright. Well, actually, it says copyright 1997 and then 2000. That's interesting. So this didn't come out in Japan until 2000? Really? So we got Donkey Kong Land 3 in 1997. I'm guessing if that's the copyright on there, this one's copyright 1995, 1996. And that's 1997-2000, meaning this didn't come out on the Game Boy Color until the year 2000. So it's just like a late release in Japan? Interesting. Again, not 100% sure. This was like 20 bucks, and I believe this was like 20 bucks. So a little more expensive than some of these other ones, as may be expected. But again, probably still cheaper. If I tried to find Game Boy Color here, if I tried to find Donkey Kong Country here for the Game Boy Color, I certainly wouldn't have got it any cheaper. Probably would have cost me a little bit more. This one, on the other hand, like Donkey Kong Land 3, probably could have picked up here for 20 bucks, but I'd be getting the Game Boy version, not the Game Boy Color version. So with all the games here, like, these either cost me less than it would have cost to get the North American versions here, or I ended up, you know, with a better version. So I was pleased to find a seller that's close by, you know, within Canada. I'm not paying duty or shipping across the border or anything, but to find a seller that has like a good selection. He has a ton of games, so I might go back and check out his eBay store again, and maybe grab some more these types of releases where like I can get these again like cheaper than if I were to just go to my local game store and find, you know, Donkey Kong Land 2 or Donkey Kong Country on the Game Boy Color, and probably would have paid more for these. Certainly with Popeye. Again, that was like $6 or $7 to get Popeye on the Famicom, compared to what that would cost me to find that on the NES. And again, I think with Donkey Kong Country 2 as well. You know, I haven't looked at pricing for that in a very long time, but I would assume I would pay at least 40 bucks for that. And again, this was like 15 or 20 from what I recall. So these were all basically cheaper, or in this case, just better. So kind of like sparks my interest in picking up Japanese games again. Anyways, guys, that's it. Just keep that in mind, and especially stuff like this. This is interesting. If you've got a Game Boy, if you're a big fan of the Game Boy Color, this is definitely one to have, as is this one. So yeah, that's it. See you guys later.